I think we have almost everybody we're 3 minutes in here. So I'll just welcome everybody again. And just a reminder that this video is being recorded. We are so grateful to you for showing up live. And I get a lot of emails from people that they're worried because they're not going to be able to attend live, and just a big reassurance that every single one of these is recorded. They're on our website. They're really intended to serve as a library of resources for our whole community. We just want all of you to have an opportunity to be kind of participate in these conversations that we have in Daughterhood all the time around all these very important issues. So just a couple of quick notes before we jump into our discussion. As you can see on the screen here, we have this beautiful slide. There are Daughterhood circles all over the country. If you are looking for one and you can't find one on the website, just get in touch with us and we'll help connect you virtually to somebody that can help meet your needs. We have a podcast, in case you didn't know. Roseanne Corcoran is our podcaster, and she is ridiculously awesome and great at what she does. And I feel like we're the luckiest people on the planet that she does this for Daughterhood. So please listen to that. It's just the best. It's just the best. So wanted to just mention that this, as I said before, is part of our Daughterhood Conversation series. We are doing this each month. Well, kind of each month. We bring our Daughterhood circle leaders together, who are this tribe within a tribe of people who are phenomenally gifted in all areas of agency, of aging and agency as well, agency and aging. And so, we want you to hear kind of what we talk about when we're together. We want you to have the benefit of listening to those discussions. So that's what this is. And today we have, you guys, I am really so excited. And I am just, again, feel really lucky. We have Karen Van Dyke and Ryan Frederick, and I'm almost as excited to introduce you all to them as I was to introduce them to each other. So Ryan, and I'll just start with Ryan. He and I have known each other a really long time, and he was one of those people I met early in the journey in creating Daughterhood, who just encouraged me and encouraged us as a community to just keep going when it was hard and it felt like I didn't know what I was doing. So he is really, he's an expert in all things aging, but his focus is really on housing and aging and place and aging and home. How do we create a sense of home and place in the context of like the larger set of attributes that are necessary for successful aging. And he also runs a company called Smart Living 360, which actually develops communities for people to age successfully and to have a good place to call home, and also consults to a wide range of organizations that are looking to do the same thing. So, and we'll get to this in a minute, but he's also an author. But I'm going to put that in a parking lot for a quick second, because we're going to give it its own little spotlight. But before I do that, I want to introduce Karen Van Dyke, who also falls into that category of people who I met early in the journey of creating Daughterhood, when Daughterhood was kind of just Anne in a blog and Susan and is this good? And I don't know. And she's like, this is good. And we're going to take it and we're going to create something out of it that's a larger community. And she, along with her friend and colleague Christine, founded conceptualized and launched the first ever Daughterhood Circle in San Diego. And she runs a company that is called Senior Care by Design. Did I get that exactly right? Yes, I did. And in San Diego, and what she does is she guides people through the process of trying to figure out what is the right place for them to be at the stage that they are in. And it's not just the older adult, but their families as well. So she gets into all of that mess. She wades in and helps to navigate it all for them. So I can't think of two other people I would rather have here today talking about care options for your parents. And today we're going to really focus in on on home and thinking about like, is my loved one in the right place? Next time we are going to talk about specifically about home care. So the types of services and supports that you can bring into a home setting to help support somebody where they are. Today we're going to be like, where should I be? And the next time we'll be like, well, given where I am, what else can I do to support myself there? So that's how we're thinking about dividing it up. So I'm excited to be on this slide right now. Right place, right time. Awesome cover, awesome title. This is Ryan's new book. It just came out. We are so lucky. I can't wait to talk about it and everything. It literally is the roadmap for this conversation. And you can see I have my copy here. I've sent one to my mom. I sent one to my mother-in-law. So I was like, could you please go to the chapter about evaluating whether you are in the right place and fill it out for me? So anyway, just so grateful, Ryan, for your talent and awesomeness. And thank you for being here today. Okay, so here's how this is going to work. You're all muted, so you can't say anything, but you can chat with us via the chat function. And so, please, we'd love to see your comments and your chats throughout. I'm only sort of good at multitasking, so I'm going to be talking to Ryan and Karen, and I'm also going to be keeping an eye on the chat. And if I miss something that you think is important and you feel like you didn't get answered, please send us through our website. We have a contact us form, and I answer every single one of them, every single one. So you will get an answer, and we would just love to, get everybody. Okay. You can see that there are a lot of us on the call right now. I recommend going to the speaker view so you can see Ryan and Karen and me mostly. So that's what we're gonna do. All right. So that is all of the table setting, I think. And I want to go ahead and jump in here. So I think, maybe I have to confess to everybody, I have sort of struggled, as Ryan and Karen know, to figure out how best to sort of frame up this conversation, because 99.9% of the questions that I get, and that I suspect that Karen gets and Ryan gets about where to live, come at a point of crisis. And the questions are sort of like, they're almost always like, what's out there, what's available, what's good quality, what's not, how can I pay for it? And the one that comes up all the time is like, I need my mom to move, but she won't. How do I get her to move? And brother is over here and I'm here and she's here, and where do we do? And all of that, all that's really important. But before we go there, I want to take a step back because this is, I feel like, Ryan and Karen really helped me to understand that we do need to kind of think about this from the perspective of like, why is where you live important? And many of us get into a situation with our loved ones, and they get into a situation because they haven't planned. And planning is hard because you have to think about a time in your life when maybe things are not how you want it to be. I was with a girlfriend at the beach. We used to vacation together, and we were sitting, in like a fun bar after being on the beach all day with our kids running around. And, so we're like having a beer, and she's like, kind of like, what do you do for a living again? And I started to tell her, and she grabbed me by the arm, we're like 50 or something. And she's like, do not ever let me go into one of those places, and that's, I think I was like, oh boy, this is how I think a lot of us think about it, but we have to change our thinking, and we have to start being more conscious and deliberate. So I'm going to stop talking, and I want to ask Ryan a little bit, because he has laid out in his book, 5 components of successful aging, of which place is one. But I think, Ryan, if you wouldn't mind just talking through those, because then everybody has a sense of where place falls within that larger framework of like, how do we do this as well as we can? So I'm going to shut up now and let you.
No, well, this is this is great, Anne. And Karen, just to be emotional back to you, I remember spending time with Anne when Daughterhood really was an idea and a passion and a recognition that this aging experience, which is really a positive thing, can overwhelm people. And there are no like objective resource to navigate this. And so it's so like awesome for me to see how this idea, this passion project has grown into the national presence with people helping each other locally, and the content that you curate and with other partners and nationally, like these little clusters of people, your circles circling up, like it's awesome. And in some respects, you're just barely scratching the surface, just barely scratching the surface. So this is such a huge,
That's so
huge
true.
need. And so it's awesome to see that, but it gives me pleasure to be there as part of that journey as it's played out. And I know, Karen, it's been great to connect with you in the last few months for a bunch of reasons. And good to be with everyone. I think you're right. And I think stuff can sneak up on us. And there's a tendency sometimes in our culture to not deal with it until it's like urgent. And in some ways, we get impacted by just ageism more generally. This idea I shouldn't think about it because it's bad. Some of that's actually counter to research, because there's something called the U-shaped happiness curve. And it's a global phenomenon. So you start out at a certain level of happiness in your 20s, and then you start to go down. Self-reported.
When you have children.
Yeah, children, and then it tends to reach its the depths of its nadir in late 40s, early 50s. I like to think there's some correlation to teenagers. I do have 3 teenagers at the moment. And then you work your way up. And then in your 70s and 80s, your self-reported well-being, your happiness is higher than it's ever been. This U-shaped happiness curve. Our society doesn't necessarily, that's not a message we hear in the media. Another thing that's important, this broad phenomenon that we're all part of, fortunately, broadly, I should say, is just people are living longer. It's one of the main accomplishments of the last century, where life expectancy doubled. Today, if someone's born in a developing country like ours, or modern environment, we half the kids are expected to live to at least 100 years old. So this longer life thing is a new and something that's going to persist. I know we've gone through the pandemic, but in some ways that's a bit of a blip of a longer narrative. And when you look at the research around longevity, only about 30% of it's linked to your DNA. Most of it is lifestyle and environment. What some healthcare public policy people like Anne and others would refer to as the social determinants of health. And so what are those areas? I outline it a bit in the book. One of them is purpose. Do we have something every day that we wake up to that's bigger than ourselves? Another area is related to social connection. We've heard a lot about that really before the pandemic, but the pandemic, I think, has put a spotlight on it, of the ill effects of social isolation as well as just loneliness. There's a often quoted statistic: loneliness can have the equivalent detriment to your health as smoking over a pack of cigarettes a day. And then another piece is being physically active, on a regular basis. How much you're moving, walking, etc. Another piece of a long life is your financial well-being. Like, do you have the financial capacity to live to 100 years? Now, keep in mind, that's not just a net worth question. It's a question also related to what is your expense level, relative to your income. And in this audience, I think a part of it too is sometimes when you look at it, it's not just your life, it's others that you may have to intervene for it as well. And then the last piece is place. The role that place has indirectly and directly in our lives. The right place makes all of the 4 areas I described earlier better. The wrong place can make those worse. And then the place itself, there's some physical environments that allow you to thrive, just how it's designed or how it's not designed. Some of it's even emotional, being the sense, do you feel connected emotionally to and belong to the place that you're in. So one of the things I talk about, again, in this mindset of planning versus a crisis, is how do you stand on these measures? Just like Anne was alluding to earlier as she held up the book, like there is an element of self-assessment that's an opportunity for us to do individually, but also with loved ones. As we look at our parents, I'm going through this too. I joke, if it just gets my parents to plan better, this book will be a success. I don't think my mom or my dad has necessarily filled in the self-assessment yet. But I do think that's part of it, because sometimes if we don't recognize that our lifestyle decisions really matter, and as we get older, actually there is research that shows that we can be quite happy as we get older, then we don't dive into the things that matter, and place in its aggregate, it's just as important as eating well and saving money, et cetera, for a longer life. So it should be put in that same echelon of life planning.
Yeah. So I love that framework. And I remember standing at a whiteboard with you at the Stories in Rockville, which is, if you live in this area, is a wonderful community that Ryan kind of like visualized and made happen as a community where people can age successfully in place. And we were at this whiteboard and you were showing me all these different pieces. And I was like, yes, yes, yes. And I think that one of the things I love that you do in the book is you lay out, you talk a little bit about, when we think about home, many of us, if I say home to you, go home, or this person's at home, or they're living at home. And this happens in public policy all the time. We call it the home and community. People want to age at home, and then everybody's walking around with different ideas of what on earth that even is. And so in the book, you have a chapter kind of dedicated to different settings or different types of options for where you might live. And single family housing is one chapter. And I want to start there because that's what most people think of as like single family housing. Like, that's where I want to age. That's where I want to live. I'm in my house. Like, I have lived in this house with the lovely pictures I now put on the wall. It took me like 2 years to do. It's like, now I want to stay here forever. I want to stay in this house forever. But it's home isn't just about the four walls of this house or the pictures on this wall. And Brian, I want to just ask you, you talk about in the book that home means something much more, sort of much deeper and broader than that. It's your neighborhood, it's your neighbors, it's your community. And so maybe if you could just touch on that, because then I want to bring Karen into the discussion to talk a little bit about why everybody's so stuck on staying in these single family dwellings.
Yeah, totally. For those that are viewing and have written a book before, maybe you've experienced this. This was my first experience writing a book. In fact, this was not part of the master plan. I remember I have a junior in high school. She just took the PSATs. And when I took the PSATs, the math was fine, but the English suggested I was English as a second language. So, see, sometimes you have these pet projects, they get the better of you. But yeah, so the reason I say that is when I got into, I thought I knew, I've been in this field for 15 years as an investor, operator, developer, a bunch of things. And I thought I knew this intersection of place and healthy aging well. And in some ways I do, but the writing process to me opened up some ideas I didn't fully appreciate. And one of them is this idea of home or place. What do we mean by place? And I would tend to think, well, it's my four walls, it's my house. The more and more I thought about it, it's a lot more than that. So it's not just our physical dwelling, but it's whether it's an apartment, a single family house, accessible dwelling unit. There's a lot of different options, which we'll get into later on. But it's also, what neighborhood are you in? What street are you part of? What metropolitan region are you in? Are you in a rural, urban, or suburban setting? What region of the country are you in? And even what country? I saw someone joined us is in the UK. What country? And the thing is, when you're in a place, you get impacted by all those layers. And if you're in, let's say you love your single family home, which we'll get to in a little bit, but you happen to be in a neighborhood that's going the wrong direction, or you don't know your neighbors at all and become socially isolated, or maybe your metropolitan area for various reasons is not going the right direction. That has often implications. I tend to beat up on Illinois a little bit. Illinois has a tough fiscal situation just with pension funds that have been underinvested in, aging infrastructure, tax policy that's challenging. So if you're in Illinois, you have to just have your eyes wide open that some things might get harder over time than they are today if your plan is to age in that state. So Anne, I think it's a big thing that sometimes gets overlooked, particularly with people living longer now, whether it's our loved ones or parents or even us. What do we make this commitment to? Because the book is really designed for place matters no matter what age, but once your kids are gone, the degrees of freedom tend to open up. You're not as necessarily beholden to a school district or things like that. But I think, so we do have to have this broad understanding of why place matters, like we talked earlier, but also what is place? Because if you focus only on the physical dwelling, you can miss big things along the way.
Yeah. I totally agree. And as somebody who works on health policy, like I'm keenly aware of those state dynamics. If you live in Minnesota, it's cold and you'll have to navigate the snow, and that's an issue, but the aging infrastructure and the public policy support, a much more supportive environment than say in some of the other states. So Karen, I want to sort of, I know you've been listening very patiently, and I know you have views on all of this. It seems like the number one challenge that people seem to face is this, it's scary to think about, most folks don't plan, they don't think this way. This is part of what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to change that mindset, but in the absence of doing that, we find ourselves in these sort of crisis situations. And then, one of the things that kind of happen to our cognitive health as we age is that we get more anxious about, and change actually becomes, at that moment when we really do need to be making some changes, it actually becomes harder to change. And then of course, adult children are often loath to ask their parents to do something that is frightening to them or that they don't want to do. And Karen, I'd love for you just to kind of riff on what you see and how you help families through coming to an understanding that there can be, like to Ryan's point, there can be, really, really possibly even better and more hopeful and positive places to be than in a single family dwelling that they think is, the be all end all.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Anne. I've been doing this work now for 10 years, and I've worked with hundreds of families at this point in time. And I hear this over and over. I should have done this sooner. I should have done this sooner. We were at a 90th birthday celebration at one of the communities that a client of mine moved into. She was very kind to invite us. So my husband and I went to this 90th celebration. There was about 50 people. We were at a table with all folks that lived in the community. And my husband went with me. He's never been in the community before. And I decided that I would say nothing. And I would let him do all the question asking. And his question to the woman sitting right across from us was, what is the one thing you would have done differently moving in? And she said, what I would have done differently is moved in here 2 years ago. So, I think that what happens is that we as a general public don't have the knowledge base, the resources, the intellect of what does it mean to age at that point in time when you're going to need a place to live because your current environment is not supporting you any longer. Mm-hmm. And so, I would say 9 times out of 10, I get the question, you're not going to put my mom in a place like that, are you? And I said, well, what does a place like that mean? And well, those skilled nursings like my grandmother was in years ago. And I said, here's the good news. I don't work with that inventory. I have really great inventory. And by the time you and I have walked through the process, you're going to be doing this whole search with grace and ease. And so, for me, it's about gaining their trust because they are stepping into a situation that they know nothing about, except that they know there's fear attached to it. There's resistance attached to it. There's, oh my gosh, what do I do attached to it? There's the healthcare system attached to it. It's all of this. I mean, they have that bit of knowledge. So it's an old narrative. And so what Ryan is doing with his book is changing that narrative. So I look at me as boots on the ground. I look at Ryan as shifting the narrative because people that call me, every single person that calls me has not planned, not at all. And so that planning becomes so much more important. Hey, there's going to be the group of people that say, you know what? I really like a crisis. So I'm just going to hang in that energy. Right? And then there are people that say, I need a plan. I need to figure this out. To Ryan's point earlier, we now have science has taken us on to, my aunt died when she was 105 almost. We have that longevity. That's lovely and wonderful and yay science. And we didn't plan for it. We're going, yay, we're going to live longer. And then, oh, well, I don't have enough money now. And well, what am I, all of those things. So there's a convergence going on, I think, at this point in time in history. I think all of that is coming together. It's going to take some time to get people to really get what's going on. And it's definitely organizations like Daughterhood that is going to definitely catapult that forward and is so necessary, so necessary. I mean, there's so many layers to everything that we're talking about.
I know.
Everything, and so, with my clients, it's truly, I said, we're in a crisis. We understand that, but we're going to do this with grace and ease. That's your mantra. This moment going forward, we do this with grace and ease. Mm-hmm. And so another question I get early on is, should she move now? Should he move now? And my response always is, you're calling me. You're calling me. Should they move tomorrow? No, but you're calling me, which means that you intuitively already know what needs to be done. And so, then it's a process, then you explore the process and, the finances are really important. And, I get calls from folks who may have $2,000 a month. And what am I going to do with that? Mm-hmm, well, that's a whole nother conversation. But by the way, folks, there are places down in Mexico, Baja, that I have a relationship with that you definitely can move to. Just saying, had to throw that in, you knew that in. And so, it's the reason that I started my company was because of that situation, because I was standing in a hospital with my sister. The social worker walked up to me, gave me 2 sheets of paper and said, here, you need to go find her a place. She can't stay here anymore because we can't do anything for her. In the middle of a Boston blizzard with 2 nieces on either side of me, emotionally distraught. That's in there. I said, never again. No family's going to go through this that I know, never again. And that's when I came back to San Diego and I started the company. Literally left my 6-figure job and started that company. This is, everybody on the call, we have a broken system. You all know that. I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but you're all smart, you're all smart people. So we're going to figure this out. And by the way, there are placement agents like myself all over the country.
And you know what, actually, Karen, I'm going to interrupt you really quickly because I think it's important for people to understand this is actually something we should let's get into it for a second. I'm about to go controversial for a quick moment. Individuals like you, Karen, work off of commission, or not commission, by the way. It's a little bit like a real estate agent, and you are paid by the entity that plays the senior living place that gets the resident. So, that's awesome because it doesn't mean you have to be rich right, to come to like a senior living agent. However, small business owners like who are members of the community like you, Karen, are very different than big things like a Place for Mom, which is a big for-profit publicly traded company. I think it's publicly traded, where they're in a call center somewhere in Topeka. They're not in your community, and they're pulling up a map and they're making money. The more expensive place you choose, the more money they make. I don't want to disparage. I'm just saying, just be aware of these incentives. If you go to get that kind of professional, Ryan's laughing. I'm like, oh my God, am I going to be sued?
No, it's just to jump in there. I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to say that earlier. And,
Okay.
and I think that's part of what is so important about daughterhood, and what I'm trying to do with Smart Living 360 and right place, right time. And that is, it's just hard to get objective input and information. Like you mentioned, these larger groups where there's not a relation, it's hard to get a relationship with that group, but it's the business model is predicated on connecting people that works best in their business model, not necessarily what's best for your loved one. And that doesn't mean that every answer you're going to get is the wrong one. I'm not suggesting that, but you got to be careful just assuming that resource really is in the best interest of what you're looking for. I recognize things get urgent, just like you talked, Karen, like you talked about, and as you've described as well. But nonetheless, like, what are these resources you can rely on? I've released the book a week ago, and it's been interesting to get just some feedback informally, and then on the Amazon review as well. And one of the things that's happened is what I was hoping for, is that the tone of it's like a friend, like you're talking to a friend. And I'm sure, Karen, that's what you do with your clients. I know, Ann, that's your DNA. But it's how can we create more things like that? Because it is complicated. Every situation is unique. And some of this is not just solving for our parents, it's us too in this journey. How can we do it? And we also have situations where there's, chronic situations, but there's also episodic. You can have a certain instance, maybe it's a fall, something happens, it wakes everyone up to, maybe we're not going to live forever, but that can also be a trigger to then, okay, how do we want to think about this? Like, what does success look like in this next chapter? So there's, in a way, sometimes something that is urgent for a short period of time, the silver lining can be that becomes the opportunity to have more involved discussion and visioning.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that about the episodic, because I think that makes it really hard sometimes for adult children to manage their own emotions. So I'll just share, because last night I was on the phone with a really good friend of mine, his wife. They live in North Carolina, his brother who lives in Seattle, and his brother's wife. So the four of them, mom, they've been trying to get their mom. They want their mom to move. They don't feel that she is in the right environment to support her safely. And she does not want to move. And they have been such great sons. They want their mom to be happy. They want to be respectful of her choices. And I said, I just want to say this for everybody on the phone and anybody who on this call, whatever, this is Zoom, the computer, or listening to this, is that, I had this, sometimes when you feel like you've just sort of channeled something really spiritual, when like you're listening to somebody and you just know that what you're supposed to say to them is like, I get a little goosebumpy saying this even now, like, I really honor what you're trying to do to honor your mother's wishes, but you also have to do what's right for the whole family. Like, you all are, there are a lot of people in this mix, and everyone, this is about finding the right balance, so that, because in my life today, I say like, oh, this is what I want, and my daughter's like, well, this is what I want. And I'm like, well, let's talk about how we can, that's what we do in families, right? So just because your mother is experiencing some dementia and some anxiety doesn't mean that then all of your needs have to be subsumed to that. And that every single time something happens, you have to get in your car and drive 2 hours Like if you need her to be closer to you so you can manage that better, you can tell her that, and I think that those conversations are so fraught and so challenging, and there's all this family drama that happens. And but I wanted to just share that they found that to be very helpful when I said that. So I wanted to share it here.
Can I comment on what? So, okay, everybody, I hope you have a pen and paper because you're going to be taking notes. So that very conversation I have almost every day. We can't get mom to move. So here are a couple of tips. Sometimes you can't get mom to move because you yourself don't know what the experience will be. And so I encourage the kids to tour with me first. You can't sell something to someone if you haven't experienced it yourself. It's hard. I mean, you can, I guess, but it's hard. Especially in this situation, you really want that experience. And the other thing is hire someone like myself, a placement agent, because what I have found over time is that the family nucleus, they don't necessarily get along.
Right.
And so, and emotionally, it makes it really tough because you have this beautiful person who you want to do everything for that you possibly can. And you have all these layers of years of things that you've done together. So I say, bring in a trusted stranger, holding my hand up. And even if your loved one has dementia, don't hesitate. Don't hesitate to do that. Go ahead and hey, mom, I want you to meet with a friend of mine. And that's it. It's a friend. It's nobody from the medical will know it. It's a friend of mine. And that placement agent will be able to have a conversation that's of friends. So how do you like it here? How are you doing? What are your days like? And maybe slip in, hey, have you ever thought about some other place? And leave it. But, the kids having that experience, that changes it. It shifts it. It turns the corner. I've seen it happen a lot. So my tip for
that for a second, and I may go a little controversial, and following your lead. I think that even the name "A Place for Mom" is a bit derogatory. And and I talk about this in the book a bit, like one of the key things is around agency. And so we almost have two different groups, if I could oversimplify for a moment. You have one group where you have where the parents are older. There maybe there are some needs around the corner. Maybe there's something that episodic happened, but they're still very much able to be in charge of their life. They may need some help, maybe some discussion, like happens in any family, like Ann described. And there's maybe another bucket where there are pressing health needs, particularly from, say, a dementia perspective, where you absolutely need intervention to get to the right answer with adult children. I think it's important to differentiate those two, because I think in some instances you take people from the first group where you have older parents that may have some healthcare needs, but they clearly have the ability to have agency, and it becomes an unwanted intervention by the family. And I've seen that for sure. I've seen situations where you have where that agency ends up being usurped by the family. And not only when that happens, you may not get to the right answer, but even if you do end up in some type of senior living community, there's a lack of willingness to want to engage because it wasn't the parent's choice. And so I think there at some level, and you mentioned this, Anne, earlier, I think there are some situations where, they're not going to be ideal. It doesn't mean that you're driving 2 hours away and all, like there's some reasonableness in this, but I think understanding that it really is best for everyone if the parent is in charge, there's agency in this, but can we see a realistic picture together? There's an early chapter in the book where I go on a rant on aging in place. And a lot of people say, I'm just going to age in place. And I hate the term, won't bother you with that at the moment, but I hate the term. But one of the biggest issues about it is people say that's my plan, but they haven't really thought through all the different dimensions about it. So, and I have some vignettes that to help people understand what they may relate to. So in some cases they think they have a plan, but they don't really. And if there's an opportunity to like think it through a bit more, then parents may see holes in it without necessarily having to drive a particular outcome, from kids.
Yeah. Well, and I want to just, this is what I love about this conversation is that we're getting into really the meat and the heart of what makes it nuanced and complex. It's not just like, here are your options, go, it's that there's a lot of questions about agency, questions about, this issue. So I've like 5 things to say at one time, but this issue of sort of like, I want my parents to do X, but they won't do it is constant. But we do have to differentiate in our minds about where it is appropriate for us to let go, that it is, despite the fact that maybe something they are doing is dangerous, it's still none of our business and it's their life. And, we might have to bear some of the consequences of it. Yeah. So my dad, he doesn't do this anymore, but he used to ride horses. Like crazy horses, and is into his 70s. And I was like, if he has an accident, it's going to be mom and me, but that was his choice, right? So there's all of that. And I wrote a blog a while ago, and Robert and Susan will be mad at me for not telling them about it before this call, but that where I said, I wrote a whole blog about letting go. And, but kind of conversely, it's also okay to put your needs first. And in particularly in a situation around dementia, where you have to simply say, I know, so many people come to me with just riddled with guilt about, a nursing home placement or assisted living facility placement for somebody, or memory care for somebody with dementia. And they just can't. And they're like, what's the right place? And I'm like, what? The right place is what works for you as a family. Taking care of somebody with dementia 24/7 is not for the faint of heart. So, and there's a zillion spaces in between those 2 scenarios. And so I think having those scenarios in your book, I feel like I'm on one of those, I feel like I'm like David Letterman. I'm like, but seriously, it's like, you've given us this thing to talk about. So I just be mindful of time. One of the things I want to make sure that we did do, which is kind of nuts and bolts on this call, just for everybody's awareness, is like, we're kind of talking in theory, it's sort of high level. And I think one of the things that is confusing is the 3 of us are very hyper familiar with all of these different terms. And again, not to, you talk about this in your book, Ryan, you have like a chapter, single family dwellings, age restricted housing, apartments and condos, senior living, there's nursing homes. Nursing homes are not the same thing as assisted living facilities. But if you're not steeped in this, you're like, what planet have I landed on? And so I don't know, Karen, maybe like when somebody first comes to you kind of just wringing their hands and not having any, how do you help them understand what that set of, okay, so it's not single family dwelling anymore. I think like a family's feeling like feels like it's not working for whatever reason. How do you help them think about what the range of options are?
Yeah, really good question. So they actually have a lot of options. And even though, and there are some communities that do have single family homes. And so it's stepping back holistically. It's looking, Ryan says it in his book, you have to look at everything. You can't just say, hey, my mom needs to go to a place up in North County. I need to know the medical, I need to know the social, I need to know the financial, I need to know all of that. So I go through all of that with them. And then the geography, what's important to them is being close to their family member. And so the geography. So that narrows it down to, in San Diego, we have over 600 residential care homes, assisted living, memory care, independent living. So we're blessed that way, that we have a lot to choose from. But as we all are all individuals, we all have what our specifics are and what we want. So I just boil that down. And then sometimes they're looking for, hey, look, my mom just needs more eyes on her. They're not watching her well enough where she is, but she needs more eyes because she has a higher level of care. And so when someone calls me and says something like that to me, and I say, well, have you ever thought about a 6-bed residential care home? What's that? Well, these are these little homes that they put in the middle of a neighborhood, and there's 6 people that live there. They have the caregivers come in. But when you have someone who definitely, just think about the footprint in a large place, and running for the caregiver to get to you, and a small place when someone needs assistance pretty quickly. So, there's, and yeah, again, I don't work with skilled nursing, but I work with buy-ins, I work with month to month, and most of my clients, it's all about month to month. Not too many people want to do the buy-in part, and that is absolutely, if you're well financed and resourced to do a buy-in. But the question, so I say I'm a cross between a yenta, a concierge, and a real estate agent. I'm a yenergent, and so it's the yenta part that's like really important to me, because that's my matchmaking. Right. And that's my gathering of information. And it truly is. I mean, you would go to a real estate agent, right? And you would say, hey, I have this amount of money. I have kids in school. It's the same thing for me, except that I need to go into layers and levels of regulation and physical needs and so on. It is fascinating work. It is amazing work. I really love what I do.
Yeah, I wish every human on the planet could just talk to you. But Ryan, this is making me think a little bit about how, when I was a little girl, and I remember meeting my great grandparents, briefly in their nursing home. And, this is in the rural, like there's one nursing home in town. That's where they went. That's where their parents went. That's where my grandparents went. And it's just a nursing home is it. That was it. And then the baby boomers are wont to do, all of a sudden in the 90s, just a zillion options started to spring up. And Karen was just walking you through all of them, there's continuing care retirement communities and assisted living facilities and independent living. And they all sort of cater to different financial, social, functional, we use that term to mean how much help you need doing basic daily things, all of that stuff. So it is a little bit like standing in the cereal aisle and you're like, what happened to when there was just Cheerios and Life and Frosted Flakes? And now there's how do I know what's right for me? And I just feel like, Karen, your advice about just start going to look, take some time to go look at.
Totally. And I can relate. I was on a business trip the other day and I forgot my toothpaste, and I didn't realize it was going to take that long in Target to find, to wade through all the different SKUs of toothpaste. It used to be a lot simpler. And not to be discouraging, because I do think it's ultimately good news, but we have a lot more options around the corner. And
right.
A lot more coming. And some of that's because with technology, there's more things that can be done to help you stay safe and healthy in non-institutional settings. More and more is going to be happening with healthcare services coming to you, even at the acute hospital level, as you have more of these hospital at home programs that are happening. When I first, when I wrote the book, and I know Karen had some great feedback when I shared an early draft with her. I remember that actually my worst chapter was on senior living. And it's because I knew too much. So I had to like really, rework it and make it more in layman's terms, but still use the insights I was aware of. And so I think, and I do think this is a challenge. I think this is a challenge right now in general, because we seem to be a bit in this like fake news era in our world. Like, how can we get just a no spin zone here on, right? On these options? And I did my best shot at it with the book to say, because in fact, Ann and I are part of a think tank called Nexus Insights. It's more in the industry side, and be speaking at a conference in a couple of weeks on this. It's like sometimes people get focused on senior living, which is part of what Karen also knows so well about. But what we're really solving for is what's the right place as we get older. So in some cases, the right place, it could be a variant of senior living, like some of the ones Karen described. That could be absolutely the best place. But it might even be an apartment building that has, where you've downsized, where you can get a sense of community in a particular place, where services come to you. One of the encouraging movements that's happening right now, of which there's some good stuff in the DC, in the Montgomery County area, among other places, is how can we be more age friendly as a society? So we're building better places in general. The village movement, yeah, absolute perfect example of what's going on. So I think there is, I think there is some level of knowledge that we need to have in this in order to be effective. And ideally, how do you get that in an objective way, but there's no need to get a PhD in this either. How to get enough to be helpful, and then know where to go. And then you can talk to the PhDs to help you, along the journey. But I would just encourage people, as you go down the path, there is a bigger world than single family homes and skilled nursing, to take it to an extreme. And there's a lot of things in between. And I think, and as I said, there's gonna be more options over time, and it's worth the effort of figuring it out.
Yeah, it's funny. I had this idea that in this conversation, like at some point we would take 5 minutes and be like, this is this, this is this, and this is this. But now as you're saying this, I'm like, that's like, I guess we could do a webinar, where we could do that if people get in touch with me and say, yes, please do a webinar where we prepare something informative with slides and materials, and we walk through all these things. Like, we're good. We will, and I think we'll totally do that. But the goal of this really was to get into some of these, more, I don't know, human issues and this question of how do we want our community, our environment to contribute to our own sense of well-being and happiness at any stage of life. And it makes me think a little bit, because I know we're turning up on time. So I'll just, my son, who is now a freshman in college, became obsessed as a younger person, maybe in middle school, elementary school, with these wonderful books about tiny houses and small houses, and like the small house movement. And I actually would get him these books for Christmas, and he would just pour through them, because I think on some level for him, there was something incredibly resonant about the coziness and the sort of that he felt like, he's like, I want to be in a place where I feel protected. Not that I was, I'm like, he was like, I want to get away from you. And no. But there's something, I think, where my mother wants to be like, when we look out at water, not that we can all afford to live on the water, but just there are certain things and elements in life that really do bring peace and a sense of well-being. And you can just be thoughtful about those and how they're going to factor into your life, no matter how old you are, is a really worthwhile pursuit, I feel like.
And I think part of it too, Ann, I think this has always been the case, but I think it's happened even more now with the pandemic. I think it's put this spotlight on place, and sadly, there are people that have, they've passed away because they were in the wrong place. And then there's some others that have been thriving on a relative basis because of this. So, It's worth the effort. I think that's one of the key takeaways in this is like it's worth the effort. I mean, I think as an adult child looking after your parents, you can be thrusted into it, but there's a big takeaway, which is for you. What do you want these, years, probabilistically, like decades for many of us? What does that
Yeah.
look like? What do we want it to look like? And how does place follow the vision that we're looking for?
I love it. I love it. And I mean, I think, Karen, let me be quiet. Let me see. Any parting words of wisdom?
I want everybody on this Zoom, everybody and all of us, then to go out into our communities. I want you to drop the word facility. I'm so serious. Drop the word facility, because here's the deal. How many? There's 37 of us on this call. I want someone in the chat to raise their hand and tell me they want to move to a facility. Go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah, see, no one. So part of what we're doing in this conjunction that's happening, that Ryan and you and Daughterhood and me, is that we need to change the culture. We need to change our words. They're not elderly, there are elders. Facility. So my parting wisdom, I want every single one of you to drop the word facility from a search of an environment where you would thrive in, because you don't want to thrive in a facility necessarily, right? And tell everybody else, and especially those of you who are on the call who work in the industry, we have to stop using that. We must. Wall Street uses it. We must stop, because it dehumanizes the experience. That's all.
So let me throw in something to Ann on this, and I'm going to amplify and also twist a little bit of what Karen said, because absolutely, we shouldn't have facilities. I talk a lot about, in some of my keynote talks, I talk about how we have too many buildings and not enough communities. And so I think it's critical that as individuals, we seek out those places that help us thrive. But I think we need to sadly acknowledge that there are some facilities and there are some buildings, not communities. And so while it's important to look for what we want, I think there also should be pressure on the environments that are out there, that if they are a facility, how can they become a community? Because unfortunately, like, we've all stepped into places which feel more facility than community. And my hope is that in this dialogue that we have, we're not only helping people think more deeply about what they want and choose wisely for themselves and loved ones. I also hope we're putting pressure on those that are creating places to create great places, not just adequate places, not just places that may look good financially, but actually don't focus as much on helping people thrive. So I think there's a movement happening right now, Ann. I do. I think there's a movement where the pandemic hit, we had a moment, take a step back, reset our lives. Like, what's important? What do we want this longer life to look like? And we got to take action on it. And I'm hopeful dialogue like this and the content that we're producing in different ways comes together to forward the conversation, and the circle groups, that you have a daughter. It's so important, because we can talk about these ideas, but without being able to hash them out in smaller groups in your regions, that's really what makes a difference.
Yeah, I completely, yes, I love all of that. And then and then the last piece I would just say is really that, is that the policy has to also support the business leaders who are trying to innovate. And that's something Ryan and I are in this group that we're involved in with Nexus Insights, are talking a lot about. And then, there are some other groups that I'm trying to kind of figure out a place for Daughterhood to plug in to influence policy. I'm still working on it, but everybody can stay tuned, because there will be a place. We will figure it out, because I think that's the other. If we all say community instead of facility, then why would Medicaid statute say nursing facility, right? We have to. So we not just in our own if we start changing the language under Karen's leadership, the way she described, then we can begin to change the law and change the regulations and change the public policy so that it supports aging in community, living in community, no matter what your age is, which is probably the best way to say it. So,
Good.
so I just want to wrap because we are over time. I feel like, I always feel like I could just keep talking and talking and talking. In June, one of our leaders was still so pumped from our conversation. She did do that. She just went and kept recording. She had more to say. And so she was fantastic. So anyway, we really appreciate you all being here. And I would ask you, please feel free, if there's any piece of this conversation that you want more of. So like, hey, you know, can we have another conversation about that thing you guys were talking about specific to this or that? Let us know, because we're pretty flexible here. And join a circle, send us your questions and your comments, and just huge thanks to our panelists, our conversationalists, Ryan and Karen. Really appreciate it. You guys are you're just very special. So thank you. And
we're doing Daughterhood tonight.
Oh, Daughterhood in San Diego tonight.
Daughterhood Circle, San Diego tonight. Be there, be square.
I think also in Atlanta. I think Elizabeth's also doing Atlanta tonight too. So
yeah, just go on to daughterhood.org and you'll see the ones happening tonight. But yeah, I'm happy to continue talking with you all at the Daughterhood Circle, because this is the kind of thing we do at Daughterhood. We get the hive mind together and we start brainstorming and we start coming up with solutions for each other. It's really fantastic.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. And thanks everyone, and have a really great afternoon. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.